Karen and Adrian had some real rage, and if anybody was going to tell them what to do, they would just physically correct the situation with some brawling and some fighting, and nobody's going to tell them what to do. And this was instilled in Jada. If anybody tries to boss you, if anybody's in your personal space, don't use words. Don't go to the authorities. Just handle it physically. Hello, welcome to another episode of Worthy. In this review, we are going to be talking about chapter 3, and the title of this one is called Leaving the Garden. So you'll recall that the first chapter was all about her grandmother's garden, and basically that is an analogy for her safe space and the place that she felt the most known and seen and loved. Well, those days are coming to a quick end. In this chapter, we're going to talk about how some of the neglect she was feeling was beginning to come out in her actions at school. And this is really where I don't stop having sympathy for the young child, but I start realizing why she was a bit of a handful for those around her. Because it seems like she was sort of either given what she wanted or put on the back burner, she's kind of a very difficult child. And it seems like she had been taught specifically by her mother that if she didn't get what she wanted, that there's a clear and evident way to handle that. You fight and you brawl physically. And so while I have a lot of sympathy for how she got here, I am also going to be honest that to be around a child like this would be very difficult. And Jade is also unable to see that any of her actions are any of her fault. From an early age, she was always defending her poor behavior. And none of the adults around her seemed like they really wanted to help her see that her actions were not helpful to her. So there's a lot of excuse making, but then a general amount of just ignoring whatever it is she's up to and what she's saying. We're also going to cover some really important and key moments in the shaping of her development. Some big wins, followed by some big losses, and so we're just continuing to put those puzzle pieces and why Miss Jada Pinkett Smith is as crazy as she is today. So if you would like, comment, subscribe, and send to a friend, I would certainly appreciate it. All right, so chapter 3, Leaving the Garden. She says bullying became a problem in 2nd grade. She's going to the local public school at this time, and apparently there was this big boy with a mouthful of crooked teeth who would not leave her alone. She said that one day he got in her face and threatened her and said, if you don't bring me $10, I'm going to beat you up. And it would appear that he had bothered her often enough that she believed this threat. So she's thinking, where am I going to get $10? Where am I going to get $10? If I don't, the guy's going to beat me up. But rather than go to her grandparents, who have always been safe people, I could understand her not going to Adrian. Because Adrian seems like she was sort of frustrated by the very existence of Jada. And so I understand her not going to her mom. But her grandparents have always been a place that she could go that were safe. And I don't understand why she didn't go to an adult and say, there's this kid at school who's like getting in my face and now he's threatening me if I don't bring him money. What am I going to do about that? I don't know. But I don't know all the things the bully said, but probably there was something along the lines of, and if you tell anybody, Regardless, she didn't feel like she could go to an adult. She knew where her grandfather kept cash, so she went and helped herself to $10, gave it to the bully, and he was ecstatic. Oh, wow, that actually worked. And so then he was like, hey, Jada, you and I are going to be best friends now that you gave me this $10. And he was so proud of his achievements that he went all over the playground showing everybody the money that Jada had given him. Well, of course, this gets to the school authorities, and so they drag both kids in. And they end up calling the parents. Grandmother gets the call. Jada writes, grandmother received the call from the school and was initially appalled. As a side note, Jada Pinkett Smith writes with a lot of caps when she wants to really help you understand the emotion of the moment, which continues to be a hallmark of her sophomoric style. Like when you would write notes in class and be like double underline and exclamation point and, really putting, it's all very junior high school. Anyway, back to the book. Grandma was appalled. There had to be a mistake. But when I tearfully told grandmother the story, she knew I must have been very intimidated to have stolen the money from my grandfather. And immediately, I already give this a side eye because what we're seeing here is that Jada has learned the art and the benefit of manipulation. So grandmother comes at her all angry and, but I didn't know what to do. And I wouldn't have done it. It's just that I had to do it. And I'm not even saying there weren't some true emotions behind that, but there's never, in this whole story, there's never any call to account for the fact that Jada just stole from her grandparents. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be super upset that the bully was bullying her. We do need to be upset about that. But throughout this whole book, and we're going to continue to see this pattern, there's a constant protection of Jada, and we're going to go after all those bad guys that made you do this. And it's like, okay, let's totally address the bully situation, but also Jada, baby, what in the world? Okay, you can't steal, and there's going to be consequence for that, Anyway, the bottom line for Marion Banfield was that the school could have done more to prevent the situation from escalating. In her view, every child ought to feel safe at school, and her conclusion was that I should go to a private school. Enabling, okay? Like, fine, if you want to put your child in private school, by all means. I mean, I teach at a private school. I can see the benefit of that. However, I also teach at a private school in a day and age in which I don't know that I would always trust my child at a public school, and I would not trust the safety of my child at a public school. But as much as I rally against stop saying it was a different era, when it comes to schooling, this was a different era. So Jada should have been able to go to the affluent public school in her grandmother's neighborhood and been just fine. And I think the problem here is not necessarily so much the public school as it was the fact that you guys are blaming the school for the fact that your kid just stole from you. That's you and your child's problem. And yes, again, deal with the bullying. The child needs to be dealt with. But you don't pull the kid out of school because somebody said, bring me money, and then she stole from you and brought the kid the money, right? Deal with the bully, deal with the child. She can probably still go to this school. It's probably going to still be okay. Anyway, she says that at this point, she just really wasn't that sure about going for another education, although she had reached the conclusion that there was a vast difference between how I was educated at home and how I was educated at school. All she knew was that conventional structure did not work for her. That continues to be her problem. Now, this is where me and Adrian have a meeting of the minds. She says, my mother's feeling was that I was just bad as hell at school. She felt strongly that I should at least be in a school setting with black teachers, black principals, and black kids, and that was damn near non-existent with private schools. But she was willing to explore options for my sake. Well, I'm with Adrian as far as I believe that Jada was bad as hell at school. There's a lot of examples in this chapter that Jada was just running her own program. But again, Adrian and I just do not see the same when it comes to racial things. Adrian seems to have this problem with white people. And I understand that she was part of the Black Power movement, and it was also a time of great racial upheaval. And so I think that she had found a movement and an ideology that helped her with her internal rage. And it gave a voice to how angry she was about life. And so if she could blame another race and try to isolate her daughter from white people, that seemed like that was the answer. But I really feel like it's a lot of misplaced rage, particularly because she had had a very good upbringing. Her parents had not struggled in this country to make something of themselves. She was the benefit of a country that wasn't out to get her. So for her to continually react to white people this is like the third or fourth instance where Adrian's like, white people, and that's problematic for me. I'm not saying that we don't address the problems in our history and that we acknowledge the fact that, we do in our history have some really negative things. I also don't see the benefit in living in that as though it's a current reality. That seems to me to be really detrimental. And, so I'm not jiving with this whole situation of let's not put her in a school that isn't predominantly black and that there is a greater benefit to her if she is with people that look exactly like her. To me, that seems like a created segregationist situation. Why do you want to segregate your child? Why do you want to make it so that she isn't experiencing a plethora of other people and other opinions and other cultures? That seems like if any parent said, I need my child to go to a white school with white teachers, white students, and white administration, that would be hugely problematic. So I don't care. I've gotten comments. People are like, well, you just don't understand. Adrienne had her way. I know what Adrienne's saying. I'm just saying I think she's coming to the wrong conclusions. Anyway, she was willing that her child should explore school, even if it might have white people in it, for the sake of Jada getting under control. Because according to her mother, and this is where I agree with her mother, Jada was bad as hell at school. Now, Marion arranged for her to have a trial with the Montessori school so that they could assess me. Now, y'all listen to this. She said her first assessment was to write a short story and illustrate it. Sounded fun. I decided to write a story reminiscent of authors I discovered on Mommy's bookshelf, like Stephen King. Such books were not necessarily appropriate for my age, but I loved horror and ghost stories all my life, so I wrote one that involved someone getting stabbed in a cave by an unknown monster, and I included a drawing. The teacher conducting my interview was disturbed, even though I could not have been prouder. First, I was not protected from bullying, and now I was misunderstood by adults who didn't know me? My attitude was, no, there's nothing wrong with me, and you people are wrong. Was there something wrong with Stephen King? No, he was a genius, so my story was also genius. She's writing a story. She's drawing a picture. And one of the things that I'm initially surprised by is the way these assessments would typically go is that I would be surprised if they would ask her to write the story in the session with the teacher sitting right there. Content creation for a child of this age would take forever. So I'm a little bit surprised they wouldn't say, okay, we want you to write this creative story, and then when you come into your assessment, we'll look over it. I can't imagine that they would have sat there twiddling their thumbs while they waited for a child to write a story and illustrate it. So the reason I'm surprised that this ever got put in front of the assessment teacher was because if she had to write this at home, was there not one adult who sort of glanced over it and was like, hey, let's try this again. Let's see if you can write a different story that's less gruesome with less blood. Now, that might be a product of the fact that that's what I would do. I wouldn't write my child's story for them, but before they hand something in to the school that I'm trying to get my child into, I would at least glance over it and be like, is this passable? Will this help you? And if it's not, I'm going to slide it right back across the table and say, do it again. I don't know. She doesn't say, but even if the case is that no other, she was completely just sitting there with the teacher, came up with the story, drew the picture and gave it to the teacher on the spot. How can she not have been a little bit ready to hear, hey, this is pretty outrageous, because everything she'd ever done, she'd been told was wonderful. That's how she didn't expect that this teacher wouldn't like it. And that's my problem. Everybody in her life has always been like, Angel Pie, you can't do anything wrong. Everything you do, you just glow like a star. And so, it's not surprising that the first time somebody says, this is not right, and this is inappropriate, that she would be shocked by it. But regardless of how they felt about her, gruesome short story, she was let into the Montessori school, as if the Montessori school would have ever not accepted her. I'm pretty sure they accept everyone. But my final thing is just that I'm surprised that Jada is telling us this story and seems to continue to defend her young self having written something like this. And what is even more surprising to me is that adult Jada would say that the teacher conducting my interview was disturbed even though I could not have been prouder. So the teacher's supposed to let you in because you're proud of yourself? I'm glad you're proud of yourself. Good. But this might not be the sort of work that they are expecting. And you might not be the sort of student that they are wanting to bring into the school, because a private school is trying to cultivate a specific atmosphere. So if they don't want a child writing slasher stories, that might just be not the environment they're looking for in their school. And that has to be okay because it's a private school, so they can make the decisions that they want to make. Anyway, adult Jada feels like because she was proud of herself, nobody should have rained on her parade. I'm not saying rain on a child's parade. I'm just saying there is a reality and there is a standard, and we have to continue to realize there is a reality and a standard. We can't just brush past it because we don't like it. All right, so anyway, she says, even though the teacher raised an eyebrow to what she had done, ultimately she was accepted, but she didn't last long at the Montessori school. She says, Mommy and Marion believed I needed more structure because, ironically, I went from being bullied at one school to running the show at this one. All I wanted to do was play and talk and tell the teachers what I would and would not do. And there is not in this entire chapter any hint from Jada that she regrets being this way. There is no hint from Jada that she is not completely charmed by how she perceives young her. She looks at herself and is like, what a delightfully precocious child. And I'm reading this story being like, oh my gosh, this kid sounds like a nightmare, you know? And constantly like, I'm not gonna do that. And you guys, let's talk. I know the teacher's trying to teach, but let's talk. You know, it's just like, sit down. All right, well, anyway. She says, our next attempt was another private school. The one-day trial experience there wasn't terrible, but I was not used to an all-white environment, and I felt like an outsider. Okay, and I'm also, I want to temper what I said earlier with the reality is that if you are the only black student in an all-white school, I can imagine you would feel like an outsider. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that she wouldn't feel that way. I'm just saying I think it would be, like, I would not choose a school for my child based on what is the color of the skin of the people there. It's more like what is being produced at this school. What's the end product here? What's their goals, ideals? Does it match and align with our family's goals and ideals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But I'm not so dim-witted that I can't imagine that it would feel a little bit uncomfortable if you felt like I'm the only one that's not white. Like that, you know, culturally, I just feel like maybe y'all don't get me, you know? So I can concede to that point for sure. As soon as I saw Mommy, I told her, I don't like it here. Thank goodness I wasn't given enough time to prove how bad as hell I was. Next, Mommy and Grandmother agreed upon a happy medium, a public school, Mount Washington Elementary, where the faculty and student body were diverse. This school was not too far from Grandmother's neighborhood, and even closer to the welcoming home of Uncle Leslie, Aunt Marcia, and Cousin Tiffany, where I walked every day after school. The situation was better, but not trouble-free. Being small, I got picked on all the time by boys and girls alike. One day on the playground in 4th grade, a much bigger girl approached me and for no damn reason grabbed a chunk of my hair and pulled so hard I thought she'd pull it out by the roots. When she returned home, she tried to discuss her misfortunes with the adults. So I guess she'd learned from the first bullying incident that it's best to just come home and tell everybody what's really going on. She thought she might get some sympathy, but Karen, her aunt, got that look in her eye that sometimes I saw in Adrian's eye, and she said, don't come up in here telling me about some girl pulling your hair. Somebody touches you, make sure they don't do it again. A tough lot. Karen and Adrian had some real rage, and if anybody was going to tell them what to do, they would just physically correct the situation with some brawling and some fighting, and, you know, nobody's going to tell them what to do. And this was instilled in Jada. If anybody tries to boss you, you know, if anybody's in your personal space, you know, don't use words. You know, don't go to the authorities. Just handle it physically. Jada felt a little bit put down by this response. But she goes on to give us a little color about Karen. She says, my Aunt Karen was so beautiful, and she was just as tough. She had to be. In school, my aunt and my mother are both constantly having to prove, don't let these looks fool you. Why do they constantly have to prove that? Karen had survived a few abusive relationships. At one point, had her jaw broken by a boyfriend, whom Adrian chased down with a baseball bat, and then had her son, my cousin Brett, taken from her by an ex. I will never forget hearing my aunt screaming for her child, my 1-year-old cousin screaming for his mother, and my mother screaming at the police to do something. Aunt Karen didn't know where Brett was for 2 years. That's insanity. That sounds terrible. You know, it's like, I've had so many people in the comments be like, Jada's childhood doesn't sound that bad. And I'm like, well, it doesn't sound that good either. The result of these traumas was that my Aunt Karen and my mother carried the burden in their veins of, I'm not to be played with. The ghosts of their grief and the roots of their aggression left impressions on me, giving me permission to protect myself when necessary. Or honestly, even when it wasn't. Because a defensive posture, looking for trouble and playing the victim so that you can then play your own savior, is not the same as having to defend yourself against an abusive boyfriend. So I feel like Jada looked at what was going on with her mom and her aunt and was like, oh, so I guess brawling's just okay at the drop of a hat, you know? Now, a person might say, why was Karen in so many abusive relationships? Why is it that she found herself constantly having to physically defend herself against these very aggressive and seemingly immature men who would lay hands on a woman rather than just have a conversation, or who would do something as dramatic as throw the kid in the back seat and drive off for 2 years. You never know hide nor hair of the child. And something has to be said. Why would the dad feel he had to take the child from its mother? And, what was going on there? I don't know. We are given no details, so I cannot even begin to surmise what was happening there. But what I can say is that Jada, who is a very dramatic soul, and it was a very emotional soul, looked at this as a permission to act out however the spirit led. She says that Karen's words stayed with her. The words of, don't ever give anybody, don't ever come up in here complaining that somebody mistreated you. You make sure that they know they can't mistreat you. ... She says, Karen's words stayed with me. I would, of course, avoid a fight if I could. And according to Jada, she never went looking for one. But to that I say, liar, liar, pants on fire. Because you certainly are looking for fights. That's all you do. You walk around saying provocative things. Even to this day, you go around saying provocative things. And then just smiling like, are you going to do anything about that? I didn't think so. See, because I have to do these things. Because they're how I'm finding out who I am as a queen on this special, special journey. Are you going to have a problem with that? Oh, do you have a problem with that? Okay, I can correct that for you. I can help you realize it's not a problem. But I'm going to keep doing my own thing, and you're going to keep being okay with it. That's right. Put a smile on your face, okay? What a freak. She says that she didn't go looking for fights, but she does say, as I got older, part of survival made fighting unavoidable. And if anyone wanted to test me, I had no problem meeting the call. We didn't think so, Jada. We didn't think you had any problem meeting the call. Your problem is that you can't not meet the call. How about you just let one go? She is totally creating her own problems day in and day out and then wanting to be like, I had to. Did you though? A lot of things happened in the summer of 1981. One of them was that my mother had started nursing school. Now that we'd moved back in with my grandparents, she made the effort to spend time with me on weekends, spontaneously announcing outings like, Jada, we're going to the beach. And then they'd go off to Ocean City together. It was a good time. She said one of the lasting gifts that Adrian gave her was her love of music. And she says that sometimes they would go to the movies. One time, her mother took her to go see Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that scene at the end of the movie where the people's faces melt off was so frightening to her that she could not go to bed. So after they had finished seeing the movie, her mom brought her home, but her mom was going to go back out with her friends right after. So she couldn't stay with Jada, even though Jada was terrified at what she'd seen in the movie. And so Jada's like, please don't go out. I'm too scared. I can't go to sleep. And so her mom's like, stop, right? And when Jada wouldn't, they went and woke the grandmother up and was like, Mom, Jada can't go to sleep and I'm going out. So can you could you sleep in here with you? And Marion, of course, was annoyed with it. And she's like, oh, crying out loud. But she made up the chase lounge that was in the bedroom so that Jada could sleep there since she was so scared of the movie. And she says the fact that she made an exception and allowed me to sleep on her beloved chase lounge was not at all lost on me. She gives us a little tidbit about grandmother that she didn't give us in the previous chapter, about one of the ways that grandmother raised her. I'm not really even sure how this fits in with the last thing she just said, because the last thing she just told us about was the time grandmother let her sleep in the bedroom with her. But now she says, it was an era that grandmother began to weave in reminders about the importance of not depending on a husband or any man as a sole source of support. She always wanted Jada to know you need to have your own money. Don't depend on a man. I feel like that's a really problematic thing to tell somebody. Because what if you meet what if you meet and marry and you're with a great guy? Seeds have been sown in your heart that men cannot be trusted, that you better have an exit. You better be planning for this to fail. You better know that he can't ultimately be all that you want him to be. Now, of course, every marriage, every relationship is going to have up and downs. But if you walk into it stashing cash because you know one of these days you're going to have to bolt because he's eventually going to show you who he really is, that seems really detrimental to a relationship. And always never depend on a man. It's but Marion, you're in a great relationship. You Your relationship is well intact. Your husband's been a great provider. You guys have a great relationship. Your husband loves you dearly. I mean, this was like a known fact in the family that he was like obsessed with Marion and loved her so much. So why are you planting these little seeds in your daughters and in your granddaughter of don't depend on a man? You know, I'm not saying we have to depend on a man in the sense like I can't breathe if I don't have a boyfriend. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying don't set your daughters up to believe that men are somehow inherently problematic. You will find what you're looking for. And it seems to me that her daughters were finding what they had been told they would find in men. Abusive men who are going to leave you high and dry and will eventually abandon you. So you better protect yourself against this wily sort of human being called man. Another odd thing that she was telling young Jada was that she needed to know how to pleasure herself. She said, your pleasure belongs to you and not to a man. I would like to say that I think that attitude can be super destructive. Ask any woman who is married to a man who has a raging addiction to pornography and ask that couple if they're happy since he thinks his pleasure belongs to him and not to the marriage. Anyway, she says that my grandmother was preparing me for a time when she was no longer alive. No one ever said a word to that effect. In my mind, she was going to live forever. Foreshadowing. She said, the main event of the summer of 1981 gave me a new leap of independence. Now 9 years old, I already was a latchkey kid. She says that she was very independent. You know, there wasn't, people let her come and go. And that was fine. It was a safe neighborhood. She had her run of the streets. Then, in the summer of 1981, she had a new experience. Her father, Rob Soule, had traveled all the way to California, where he had married a new woman and had a new family, and she was invited to spend the summer with them. Now, it was kind of a weird situation because Rob was actually never there. He had started a new job, but he'd also started drinking again, so he was like, you know, doing his own thing. The stepmother was also doing her own thing. She worked, but she was just really had her hands full with her other kids, so it's not like she was there to entertain them. That didn't matter to Jada. She and her cousin hit the streets. So she said she spent time with her stepsister, Regina, and they spent all kinds of time with all her teenage friends just wandering the streets. She said there were palm trees, sunny skies, and cute boys. Cute is capital C, capital U, capital T, capital E, capital WTF, honestly, because why are we still writing like it's middle school? She said that there were tall chocolate drops to low-riding cholos. In a summer, I mean, who describes men like this? She says, in a short amount of time, I went from flying out in my tidy ponytail, dressed in a cute little outfit designed and made for me by my grandmother, to heading home to Baltimore in some Rick James-style cornrows with beads and all. She loved those cornrows with the beads when she'd swish her head and listen to the go click, 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 clack. It reminds me of Monica in Friends when she gets her hair done like that. I love that scene. Anyway. Well, I'll tell you who wasn't fond of it, and that would be Marion. As soon as she set foot back in the Baltimore house, Marion made her take her hair out and go straight back to wearing the kitty pigtails that Jada did not think fit in with her new persona. She says, not long after I returned from Cali, don't you hate it when people refer to California as Cali? I have a real problem with that. She says that Mommy announced out of the blue that she was marrying Tony. They'd been dating a while, and now the three of them were going to go down to the courthouse to make it official. Jada was not impressed. She was not looking for this interloper to change the dynamic between she and Mommy. Already as it stood, she was trying so hard to vie for Mommy's attention. She doesn't need a new contestant in this competition. Well, as it turned out, Tony was awesome, according to Jada. She says, and he does sound pretty awesome, he was a lawyer, a young and up-and-coming lawyer. Her mother at that time was working to become a fully licensed RN. So at this time, Tony really took over the parenting. Yet again, somebody else doing Adrian's job. But, I will say she was working really hard in school. So it was very helpful that Tony was so on board to take care of Jada. And he was. Honestly, I'm really shocked that he was this into taking care of Jada. And nothing untoward is ever suggested here. Nothing salacious, nothing of the sort. And so I don't want to put that out there. Because Tony might have just been an awesome guy who just loved to spend time with this, prepubescent child But, Jada doesn't seem like she was a total joy to be around all the time. So it's just surprising to me how much time Tony was like willing to spend with her, particularly because his career was quite demanding. He's a lawyer, an up and coming young lawyer. He's got to earn his keep in this world, in this dogfight, But somehow he made all kinds of time for her. And grandmother, of course, was all about Tony. Grandmother really dug him. He was a hungry, ambitious young lawyer with the potential to make it big, and he fit perfectly into grandmother's picture of whom her daughter was meant to have as a husband. Also, Jada says that as a male figure, he brought a level of security to the dynamic with my mom and I that I hadn't felt before, outside of the influence of my grandfathers. I was new to this traditional kind of stability and consistency outside of Marion's house, and I had to admit, it felt very nice. She, and Tony was willing to provide all the accoutrements to a very stable traditional life. When they first come together as a little family of three, they'd been living in this roach-infested row house, and it was just nasty. And didn't matter how many times the bug man came and sprayed for bugs, the roaches would come back. And so, when Tony bought a brand new house with a sprawling kitchen and huge bedrooms and yard and all this, and brought them to it and said, "This is our new house," it was just like, can it get any better than Tony? I mean, life feels so good with Tony. And, he was also all about the road trips. He loved to take Jada on these road trips. And the mom could never come because she's too busy trying to become a nurse. She can't just drop everything. She's trying to get through college here. Well, that didn't stop Tony from being like, "That's okay, Jada, get in the car, let's go." So they go on these road trips all over the Northeast. And they'd go visit his college buddies, they'd go visit his relatives. Sometimes it would just be for a day, sometimes it would be for a whole weekend. But she was just super thrilled about it. It was great. And, Tony was just always down to hang out with her, no matter what. And I'm like, Tony, how did you have the time, though? How did you have the time to be road tripping? Don't you have a case you need to be prepared for? Another thing they shared was his preparation for cases. So, he'd be prepping on a case, and he was a criminal defense lawyer. So he was both a prosecutor and a public defender. And that meant that the crimes he was working on were hardcore crimes, including violent murders. And he'd slide all the pictures of the murder case right across the table to her and be like, "Let's talk about it," Now, what child wouldn't be titillated by the salacious nature of these crimes and be loving being involved in the lawyer's work? Obviously would have been pretty exciting. But I just wonder how appropriate that was for this child to be seeing vicious, gruesome photographs. Jada says, she was looking through some intense photography as they talked about the case. And he was just loving the fact that Jada was so invested in what he did for work. He took her to the courthouse multiple times so that she could see him in action. I feel really annoyed with myself for kind of giving him the side eye at how invested he was in her, because maybe he was just that much of a stand-up guy that he was just totally in on his girlfriend, now new wife's kid, and maybe he really wanted to step into the role as dad. Maybe he's just super awesome. And Jada certainly does not suggest that he was anything but totally above board and fantastic. And I really think that that's great. I'm just surprised that he had the time for it. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. Do I know what I'm trying to say? I don't want to suggest he was up to anything he shouldn't have been. This is just interesting to me. He helped her with homework, and she was not a good student. She says English and social studies and things like that came more easily to her, but when it came to math concepts, she would just shut down. She couldn't do it. I can't. He'd be sitting there trying to explain it to her. She'd just be super frustrated. But day after day, he still kept going. Tony sounds awesome if it's all true. Now, the one thing that happened where she just totally soured on Tony was when he would not take her side, and yet one more bullying instance. And I would say that even to this day, she's not rectified the fact that Tony would not come to her defense here. But let's talk about what happened. Apparently there was this, tall, skinny kid who she says was just some fool that was always in her face. And she said she was taunted and bullied every day by this guy. Now, I don't know what bullied means. Does that mean that he was physically aggressive with her, like walking in the halls and like shoving her? Does it mean he was tripping her? Does it mean he was, throwing things at her? What does bullying mean? I understand taunted. So with his language, he was being mean to her, but bullied, that could encompass so many different actions. Regardless, one day in the library, he decided to get in her face and he was pointing his finger at her. And she said that he was too close to her and his finger almost touched her nose as he was like in her face. And so she just took this as, the indication that it's time to throw down, which she did in the library. She's beating up on him, scratching his head, face, and neck. And she says that because of the injuries, they said that it was her fault. She says, we were immediately sent to the principal's office. The boy had visible scratches on his face and neck, which the principal took to mean that he had all the injuries and therefore she needed to come down on me. I had lost several fights already in elementary school with the scars to prove it, but not this one. I pleaded, I keep telling my teacher he's messing with me and nobody did anything. He got in my face. So even she's not saying he laid a hand on her. He was just in her face, right? And I'm not saying that was a pleasant experience. I'm not saying that the kid should not have been dealt with. And apparently she'd gone to teachers before and said, this guy keeps bugging me, and nobody was doing anything. So I think she felt like pushed to action because the guy kept getting in her face. But never does she say he'd ever laid a hand on her. Never does she say he'd made a habit of pushing me. He'd made a habit of locking me in closets. He'd made a habit of throwing things at me. I'm not defending the bully. Please hear me when I say I'm not. The administration should have done something about this kid. And it's one of my deepest problems when a child continues to let the teachers know, hey, something's going on. I'm being bothered. And everyone's just like, well, I didn't see it. It's like, well, do something about it. Something has to be done. So I'm not giving a pass to the bully. I'm just saying she, to this day, is unable to see that her reaction to what the bully did was an overreaction given the situation of somebody pointing in your face. What he did to her did not merit her response. And to this day, she doesn't seem to be able to rectify that. So she says the guy got in her face and the principal barked, watch your tone or you'll be in more trouble than you are now. She says, I actually like my principal. I found her fair, but in this case, she was wrong. I had a right to protect myself and nobody was going to change my mind on that. It was what I had been taught. Yeah, she'd been taught by all of the women in her life that if somebody is in your space and you don't like that, get physically aggressive. She went and she told Tony thinking that he would really defend her, But when she went home, Tony went in on her like he never had. Before I could finish my defense, he sternly countered. Are you crazy? You were fighting a boy. He could have really hurt you if he wanted to. And that's true. Tony goes on and on and on. She said he could really talk. Being a lawyer, he just never did anything but talk. And all she could think as he was lecturing her was, well, give me another opportunity, I'd do it again. What really aggravated her, though, was the fact that Mommy sat there in silence, the very woman who had taught her to react like this when somebody gets in your face. She said she let Tony take the lead. And she's real pissed about that. Because she said, oh, now I shouldn't fight? But you're the very one who raised me to fight when I don't like it. But now you're going to sit there all diminutive in the corner and let Tony take this one? No, thank you. I can see that would be annoying. That would really get on my nerves if I were Jada in this situation. And especially because she's over there trying to make excuse after excuse after excuse for herself. And that's a pretty good one. I was taught that this was acceptable, but now I'm supposed to not do it. Nobody gave me that message. But then what really pushed over the edge was the fact that she was going to be punished. And this is what she writes. What? Capital W, capital H, capital A, capital T, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. She has not gotten beyond writing like she's passing a note to the 7th grade girl next to her. Yeah, well, whatever. Punish me? Tony and I gave each other the silent treatment for damn near 2 weeks. My attitude is written on my face. Who tells a person how to protect themselves when no one else will? This is stupid. Yeah, though, Jada, you were fighting somebody and you scratched their face and neck so that they had visible wounds on them. You are culpable for your behavior. No one is saying that the other person should get a pass on being in your face, but you chose to lay hands on that person. You have to have some kind of a consequence for that. And if Tony's going to be in your life, and Tony is going to be your dad, and your mom's agreed to share parenting relationship with him, then maybe there is a new, sheriff in town. And maybe the new sheriff doesn't believe that you should just hit somebody because somebody looked at you the wrong way. This experience was an object lesson for my later journey as a mother. It taught me that one ought not to combat a child's determination. Any child of mine would probably have strong willpower, and when the time came, I made a promise to work for understanding with patience instead of trying to break their resolve. And God gave me not one but three with fierce self-determination. Okay, but there's a difference between trying to break a child's resolve and try to break their will and try to manipulate them into correct behavior and holding a child to a socially acceptable standard. You can't go around hitting people because they got in your face. You can't go around being physically aggressive because somebody gave you the side eye. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And Tony may have been trying to help you out there. But to this day, she seems to have no problem with the way she reacted to that situation. That's a wild reaction to physically assault someone because they got in your space. Even if you are annoyed by that person, remove yourself from the situation. Go to a teacher. Say, this person continues to be in my space. If this person will not stop being in my space, I will sit myself in the principal's office until somebody is ready to help me. But I'm not going to get involved here. But somebody needs to do something. Find some nonviolent way to get people to listen to you. Marion could have taught her about nonviolence, but unfortunately she's listened to Adrian. Time passed and all was forgiven. We moved on. Everybody got back to their hustle. Tony's hustle was strong. She says that her mom was busy, Tony was busy, and her mom was busy learning how to be a nurse, but that's not the only thing her mom was busy doing. She says that, though I didn't know it yet, my mother was a full-blown, high-functioning heroin addict who was holding it all together. The part I saw, the determination and drive, was a gift for me to witness because it revealed how discipline, self-confidence, and willpower can be a potent recipe for success. And she says that while Tony was busy hustling as a lawyer, her mother was busy hustling to become an RN and keep that heroin addiction from rearing its ugly head. Her hustle was drama. And I don't mean just in life, but I mean on the stage. As it turns out, she was in yet one more production of The Wizard of Oz. It seems that at this time, there was only one play that was being run in the Northeast. And that was The Wizard of Oz. But this time, she was Dorothy. When it came time for her to sing her ending solo, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, suddenly she forgot the lyrics on stage. But because of her, as she says, confidence, willpower, and discipline, she suddenly knew exactly what to do. And I have to say, this was actually a really brilliant play on her part. So she forgot the lyrics. Instead of standing there like a deer in the headlights, like a fool, she decided to fix the problem by telling everybody and being honest, hey, I forgot the lyrics, so why don't you all join in with me? And she said that the moment played out as though it had been planned. It was as if I was shining a spotlight on the audience, which everybody loved. And that became one of my proudest moments because I made sure the show went on and I barely missed a beat. It was a crash course in the power of don't let them see you sweat. Yeah, I probably would have been pretty proud of that too. Instead of hiding behind the fact I didn't know, I was just honest with it and then created a whole new moment. So sure, totally, I'd be proud of that. And I think she should have been proud of that. And that was a definite high for her. It also taught her the joy of being in control. And I think that that was the greater high than just the actual performance itself. I think that that's why she loves acting. I think that that was the draw for it. It was that I get to be in power of how you feel in this moment. I'm going to make you feel things inside because I'm good at portraying this emotion and this whole thing. The power of performance, the power of getting other people to react is its own special kind of power. And I think that that was really the drive for her. She says, from then on, my performing aspirations became more serious, and she began to attend this after-school program called TWIGS, which stands for To Work in Gaining Skills. It was at the Baltimore School of Fine Arts, and it was sort of the stepping stone to getting into their high school. Now, she said that also at this time, she and Tony loved to watch Miami Vice together. It was their Friday night tradition. But those Friday nights, while they lasted, though they were magic, were soon to come to a grinding halt. Suddenly, the world was going to go from being a safe little haven with she, Tony, and her mother to just every single bit of safety disintegrating right beneath her. She says the 1-2 punch came in early 1985. As it turns out, Marion had had cancer for a while, though she had not been told about it. Now, there was an instance when Marion had had cancer earlier on, but she recovered and she was in remission. So to Jada's mind, okay, well, that was an unfortunate incident, but it's all over now. Well, it came back, but this time it came back in her bones. And if any of you have ever had a family member suffer from cancer, when it comes back and it rears its ugly head. And there's much less likelihood that things go well the second time. It did not go well. Grandmother was 70 years old, and she passed away. And Jada says that she found out after school one day when Uncle Leslie came to pick her up, which was very unusual. He would never have done that. And he said to her very calmly that her grandmother had died. And all she could manage to say was, well, okay, because she didn't really believe it. In her mind, grandmother was always going to be around. So it's like she just could not register what those words meant. When she got to the house, everyone was beside themselves with grief. I mean, they were howling and just completely unable to hold it together. Not surprisingly, I mean, the matriarch just died. Karen insisted that she needed to come and see grandmother. And she said that this was the last time she'd be able to see grandmother, and she needed to say goodbye. No, was all I could think. I hadn't known that her body was still in the house. My heart shattered. I don't want to, I told Aunt Karen. I was scared to see my grandmother dead. That would make it all too real. Karen replied, you have to. This will be your last chance to see her. I know my Aunt Karen meant well, but I wish that I had not gone to see her. I agree. I don't know who thinks it's comforting to see a dead body. It is not. There's something about it that is so frightening because all the light is gone from the body. Like you see it for what it really is, that this is just a shell holding our soul. Because every single time I've ever looked into a casket, I have wished that I had not looked. And I make it a habit now to not look. I hate it. I hate it. And I will not have an open casket. It's just so disturbing. You know, I don't want to look at this shell of who I loved. The life, the light, the everything is gone. And now it's just like this frozen mask of, you know, and of course, they're always really caking on that makeup and in ways that you never knew the person to look. I remember when my mom passed away and going up to her, standing by the casket, you know, because it's the viewing and everyone's filing past. Me and my 5 brothers and sisters are standing there at the casket and everyone's coming and saying their condolences and, you know, looking at my mother for the last time. And I remember looking at my mother just being like, she never wore her makeup like that. Like, it's just like, it was like dramatic eye makeup. It like it was, first of all, it was never who she was anyway. There's something about the face. I mean, clearly the person is dead, but it's just like, it's not like people like, they just look like they're sleeping. I hope I don't look like that when I'm sleeping, you know? So I don't blame her for wishing she hadn't seen her grandmother. And I really wish that they hadn't made her do it. Although, you know, we think about back to Prince Harry, he really could have benefited from seeing his mom dead. You know, he lived 14 years in denial. So maybe it's a benefit she saw. Anyway, when her mother arrived, her mother just fell apart completely. She said that she was inconsolable and that the whole family was just beyond devastated. And there was just a complete and total chaos of grief that descended upon the family. As she's standing there, Karen keeps telling her, come closer so you can look into her face. Come closer, come closer. And Jada's like, no, I don't want to. She said that she took 3 more steps and got a little bit closer. And she said her grandmother did look peaceful, which was nice because the truth is that during all that bone cancer, her grandmother had just often been in so much pain. And all she could do was moan and talk about her discomfort, which is how cancer patients are when they have bone cancer. And so to be able to see her grandmother not in pain was a blessing to some degree. She said she accepted that her grandmother no longer existed in what now seemed to be a shell. Yes, it is like a shell. It's very scary. But to compound the whole thing, to make it that much worse, it wasn't just the loss of Marion. It was now the loss of Tony too. Tony was really over it now. I mean, it's like he put in his time trying to raise this child with Adrian. But Adrian loves the heroine more than she loves anybody else. And the time had come for Tony to see himself out the door, which he did. She says that Tony and Mommy started the process of divorcing. All the solid ground under my little feet disappeared in less than 6 months. Tony did his best. He told me that although he and Mom were divorcing, quote, you are still my daughter. Please. Tony didn't mean that. He just said it because His reassurance dissolved before long, after he met a woman who initially tried to be maternal toward me, but soon forbade him any contact with his ex-wife's daughter. She said, "I'll never forget receiving a phone call from this woman when she told me, 'Find your real father,' and then hung up on me." Wow, Tony, you really don't know how to pick them. Weirdly enough, after saying, "Leave me alone, stop bothering me, go find your real dad, and don't talk to my husband anymore," the woman continued to harass Adrian and Jada endlessly until Grandmother Shirley stepped in. Grandmother Shirley said, "I know people in high places, so back off," and the woman did. But though they never heard from the woman again, which was pleasant, they also never heard from Tony again. She writes, "The rejection was brutal. He was my only active father I ever knew. Having him ripped out of my life was far more devastating than having a man who was my biological parent tell me that he couldn't be my father. Everybody always puts so much emphasis on blood becoming the most important thing when it comes to familial bonds. In my case, the bond I had made with Tony was far more powerful than the blood I shared with Rob. Something broke inside me. My grief was oceanic. So I put it on a library shelf labeled unlovable and tried to leave it there for good. My 13th year was when my life changed dramatically and when the Baltimore streets became my home, where I went in search of my power, sense of control, and love." So that's how she found herself up at the 7-Eleven at 2 a.m. Interesting. All right, that's the end of that chapter. We're getting to some juicy things, my friends, I can tell you. It's good to know these little pieces of her puzzle, but for me, the overarching theme of this chapter was nobody ever asked Jada to take account for her actions, and so to this day, she doesn't know how to do it. And that's why she's always making excuses for herself, and that's why it's always somebody else's fault, and that's why she, does to will whatever, because she had her rights, It felt good. So she did it. All right, that is it for today. I will see you guys later, and I'll see you this Sunday with our next chapter of Trader King. Bye.